Have you noticed this trend lately? More and more Christians are saying demons aren't fallen angels. They're the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, or the giants that died before the flood. To a lot of people, that sounds like a brand new theory, like some sort of edgy YouTube theory or a TikTok theology. What if I told you this isn't new at all? What if I told you that early Christian leaders, some of the most influential voices in the first few centuries after Jesus, taught the exact same thing? They all talked about the giants, the fall of the angels, and the belief that the spirits of those giants became the demons that still trouble humanity today. So this new idea is actually one of the oldest interpretations of Christian history. Long before modern writers rebranded Genesis 6 as the sons of Seth, and long before seminaries pushed the stories of the Watchers into the myth category, the early church fathers were already talking about these exact events. Some debated the details and others defended them openly, but none of them treated the Watchers, the giants, or the origin of demons as fantasy. To many of them, the fall of the angels, the birth of the giants, and the rise of unclean spirits was simply history, a worldview inherited from ancient Israel and Judaism, the apostles, and the traditions preserved in works like 1 Enoch. And when you start reading their writings, something becomes very clear. This wasn't fringe or a new idea, and it wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was early mainstream Christian belief, carried for centuries after the time of Jesus. So today, I want to walk you through the actual words of early church fathers, early Christian writers, and the early Jewish writers who spoke about these things long before modern scholarship tried to reinterpret Genesis 6. And to start, we're going to look at a fascinating witness named George Syncellus, a writer from more than 700 years after Christ, who still preserves the same understanding you find in Jude, Peter, and 1 Enoch, even in the medieval era. Syncellus was a Byzantine monk and a historian who wrote a huge chronological work. And in it, he talks openly about the 200 watchers who fell from heaven. And what he records is pretty fascinating. He places the fall of the watchers, those 200 who fell from heaven, in Anno Mundi 1000. This just means 1,000 years after the start of creation, exactly in the days of Jared. Just like 1 Enoch says, he describes 200 watchers descending, taking human wives, producing giants, the men of renown, and being remembered by Peter and Jude from the New Testament as angels who did not keep their proper domain. Syncellus is treating this as literal history and pulls information from 1 Enoch, Moses, and even Peter. He believes that the giants were real. He believed they were the offspring of the Watchers, an angelic rebellion, and he believed the spirits of those giant offsprings became the demons that humanity still interacts with. And the key detail he uses, 200 watchers of his line went astray. He even calls this fact scripture. To me, this is huge because Syncellus, just like we'll see with other early Christian writers, understood that these angels originally had a divine assignment to watch over humanity, but they defected. They crossed the boundaries set by God. Jude describes these as angels who left their own habitation. Syncellus did not view this information as false. For him, this was real history. Now, before we go any further, if you're completely new to the whole idea of the 200 watchers, the men of renown from Genesis 6, or where demons actually come from, don't worry. I've covered this in detail in previous videos, but I'll give you a quick overview so that you're not lost. And if you're already aware of the story of the Watchers, feel free to just skip ahead. So here's the short version. Genesis 6 talks about the sons of God coming down and taking human women. In the ancient world, including early Judaism and Christianity, these sons of God were understood to be heavenly beings, often called the Watchers. According to the older tradition, 200 of the Watchers left the place God assigned them, descending to the earth in the days of Jared, and fathered a hybrid race with human women. These hybrids were the giants, also called the Nephilim, the mighty men of old and the men of renown. When the giants died in the flood, their bodies were destroyed, but their spirits remained. And these disembodied spirits, neither fully angel nor fully human, became what later generations called demons or unclean spirits. So that's the basic framework the early church fathers and early church leaders were working with. And that's the worldview we're exploring today. Let's continue looking at the writings of these early Christians. Now let's go back almost 600 years before Syncellus to the 2nd century, to one of the most influential Christian teachers of the early church. Clement of Alexandria was a major Christian teacher in the city of Alexandria, one of the intellectual powerhouses of the ancient world. What's interesting is the way Clement explains the origin of certain kinds of human knowledge. In his Stramata, he actually gives 4 different explanations for where Greek philosophy came from. And one of those explanations is pretty surprising. Clement says that some knowledge was passed down by angels, including angels who had fallen. He writes that certain angels sank into pleasures and then revealed their heavenly secrets to women, while the other angels kept that knowledge hidden. Clement is drawing on the same ancient tradition found in the Book of Enoch, that the angels who sinned before the flood handed down forbidden knowledge to humanity. And in another work, Clement even quotes Enoch directly. He says, Enoch says that the angels who transgressed taught men astronomy and divination and the other arts. The scholarship you're looking at points out that writers in this period believe that fallen angels taught things like cosmetics, dyeing, the use of roots and herbs, enchantments, and other specialized arts. And Clement includes that idea in his broader explanation of how certain skills and ideas entered human civilization. So for Clement, the influence of angels, both good and fallen, was one of several ways ancient people received knowledge. And he treats that explanation seriously. It was part of the early Christian worldview about how the world before the flood shaped the world that came after it. Next, let's look at Tertullian, an early Christian writer from the late 2nd and early 3rd century. Tertullian talks about the fallen angels in a very direct way, and he connects their actions to things that were still influencing human culture in his own day. In his work on the apparel of women, Tertullian says the sinful angels were the ones who introduced certain kinds of arts and skills to humanity. According to him, these angels revealed the material substances of the earth and showed people how to work them, especially gold, precious stones, and techniques used to shape them. Tertullian explains that these teachings stirred up lust in women and helped to fuel the desire for ornamentation and costly adornment. He even points back to Enoch's account, saying that the angels taught women things like eyelid painting and the dyeing of wool, practices that eventually led people away from the simplicity God intended. And he makes the point that since these angels were condemned by God for revealing these arts, Christians should be careful not to celebrate the things that came from them. Tertullian believed the fallen angels truly passed these skills to humanity, and that their influence could still be seen in everyday culture, in beauty practices, in luxury, and the desire for things that distract people from holiness. Now let's move to one of the very first Christian apologists after the apostles, Justin Martyr, from the mid-2nd century. In his apology, Justin gives one of the clearest early Christian explanations of the origin of demons. According to Justin, when God created the world, he put the angels in charge of watching over humanity. But these angels violated their assignment. Justin said they fell into lust with women, and from that union, they begot children who are called demons. For Justin, the demons of his own day were the present disembodied spirits of those ancient giants, the children of the fallen angels. Their bodies were destroyed long ago, but their spirits continued, and those spirits became the hostile forces that still deceived and harassed mankind. Justin goes on to explain that after their fall, these angels and the demons born from them corrupted humanity. They taught magic, instilled fear, demanded sacrifices, and led people into slavery through lust and superstition. And because the poets and mythmakers didn't understand the true source of these influences, they ended up attributing these acts to the pagan gods like Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, and the rest. So just like the others we looked at, in Justin's worldview, the fallen angels were real historical beings. Their offspring, the giants, became the demons. And those demons continued to influence the nations all the way to Justin's own time. Now let's take a look at Irenaeus. Writing in the late 2nd century, one of the most important early theologians and a direct link to the generation after the apostles. Irenaeus also preserves a fascinating piece of early Christian tradition about the fallen angels. In Against Heresies, he quotes an older Christian source, which he calls the Elder, who portrays the sorcery and idol-making of heretics as coming from Azazel, the same fallen angel mentioned in 1st Enoch. According to this tradition, the angels who sinned taught humanity the arts of magic, astrology, and even idol-making. When Irenaeus quotes the Elder, he's referring to a respected Christian teacher from the generation right after the apostles. It's most likely Papias Hierapolis, a man known for preserving early traditions about angels, prophecy, and biblical truth. In another work, Irenaeus gives a fuller list that closely follows 1 Enoch 7-8. He says that the angels brought their wives teachings of wickedness, including the virtues of roots and herbs, dyeing in colors and cosmetics, precious substances, love potions, bewitchments, and all sorcery and idolatry that was hateful to God. His source is clearly coming from the book of 1 Enoch, fallen angels revealing forbidden knowledge that spread corruption across the world. So again, for Irenaeus also, these teachings were part of the ancient understanding of how evil entered human society. But something interesting happens as we move forward in history. For the first few centuries of Christianity, the story of the 200 Watchers was not considered fringe. It was without a doubt mainstream belief. Jewish communities even held it as the standard interpretation of Genesis 6. Early Christians also embraced it, especially because of the influence of the popularity of the book of 1 Enoch in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Writers like Clement, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus all assumed this storyline. Angels sinned, giants were born, and their spirits became the demons. But the scholarship shows that by the 3rd and 4th centuries, a shift began. Around the year 200 AD, only one Christian writer, Julius Africanus, argued that the sons of God in Genesis 6 were actually just human men. His view was unusual at the time, but it was the beginning of a new trend. By the 4th century, more Christian teachers started to doubt the idea of angels fathering children with women. Writers like Didymus the Blind pushed Genesis 6 into an allegorical reading, following the same approach introduced earlier by the Jewish philosopher Philo. Then, in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, this new interpretation became the dominant one. Influential leaders rejected the angelic interpretation of Genesis 6 and replaced it with a view that later became the standard Christian tradition, that the sons of God were simply righteous men, not angels. And when this new interpretation took hold, something else happened at the same time. The Book of Enoch lost its authority in the eyes of the church. As the church distanced itself from Enoch, references to the Watchers and the giants began to fade. Starting in the 5th century, discussions of the fallen angels from Genesis 6 almost disappeared entirely from Christian literature. In other words, for the first 300 years of Christianity, the Watchers and giants interpretation was normal. After the rise of allegorical interpretation and the decline of Enoch's influence, the older view was slowly pushed aside. But as the early sources show, it was there from the beginning. We can see early church fathers like Origen refuting the ideas in Enoch and claiming that Enoch is not accepted within the church, even though it was very well known by this time. Origen wrote these words around AD 248, nearly 200 years after the apostles. By this time, the church was already moving away from Enoch and its interpretation of Genesis 6. So in his writings, when Origen responds to Celsius, he makes it very clear. The Book of Enoch isn't accepted as scripture. But what's fascinating is that even as he dismisses its authority, he still knows the story well and argues against Celsius by referencing it. And here are a few other early writers who trusted Enoch as scripture, which I found in passing. I'll put them on screen quickly for your reference. Now let's shift from the early church writers to a Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century, right around the time of the apostles, Flavius Josephus. Josephus wasn't a Christian writer, but he gives us something incredibly valuable. A window into how Jews in the first century understood the giants of Genesis 6. And what he records is also shocking because he is one of the most well-known Jewish historians of all time. Josephus talks about the giants as real historical people. When he describes the land of Canaan, he says the spies actually saw the descendants of giants. And when Joshua's armies later conquered Hebron, Josephus says the Israelites found the remains of these giants, and their bones were still being shown in his own day, unlike anything seen among normal humans. He also described giant warriors who fought against David, men so large and so strange looking that they terrified the Israelites. One Philistine giant he mentioned was 6 cubits tall and even had an extra finger and toe on each hand and foot, just like the biblical account. But Josephus goes even further back in history. When he retells the pre-flood story, he says that many angels of God had relations with women, and from that union came children who grew into violent, arrogant giants. He even notes that this was the ancient tradition, that the giants were the offspring of heavenly beings who abandoned their place. Now, whether or not Josephus personally endorsed every detail of the older Enoch story is unclear, but he does believe 2 things. The giants were real and their descendants were still remembered, and sometimes seen in his time. And the ancient tradition connected these giants to angels, a view that was widespread long before Christianity. So Josephus ends up preserving a crucial piece of the puzzle. In the first century, the same century the New Testament was written, the idea that the angels fathered giants wasn't a fringe concept. It was already part of Jewish historical memory. And the world Josephus describes matches the worldview we've seen in early Christianity. The giants were real, their origins were supernatural, and their legacy continued long after the flood. So don't let anyone convince you that this is some new idea. The early church wrestled with these stories, preserved them, and took them seriously. We're just rediscovering what they already knew. For anyone claiming that this is just some new modern theory, the historical record says otherwise. The early church said it first. We're simply repeating them. So the next time that somebody shrugs us off as some modern theory or fringe history, just remember it's not new, it's original. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe, and you might like this video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.